Today I want to show you the new One Stitch at a Time design. This is the design that's for March 2020. And I stitched this design up using the 12 weight Valdani, the pearl cotton, which I really love. It's the 0501, or actually it's 0501. Anyway, I really like that. And so this year I'm going to do one of the stitcheries samples in this color and then an alternate one. Although this month I'm actually using the same thread. So I wanted to show you how I like to do it. I'll do it quick so that if you've seen this before, it won't be too boring for you. What I do is I print out the design in reverse, and I'll give you the regular and the reverse in the email. And I print it out on the paper side of a piece of freezer paper. I do sell these on my website. They're pre-cut to 8.5 by 11, so they're really handy. So once I have that printed out, all I have to do is iron it with a dry iron onto my fabric, onto the back of my fabric. Now the pattern and the fabric are stuck together. They're not going anywhere. And it stabilizes the fabric, so it makes the fabric much easier to draw on. So, you know, without that stabilization under there, it's really kind of hard to trace on fabric. I'm using a Pilot friction pin, by the way. These disappear with the heat of an iron. I like to use these so that if my stitches don't cover my lines, it's no big deal and I'm not worried about it. So then the next step would be to use a light box or a window, and then I'm just going to trace my design. Simple as that. Peel the paper off and I'm ready to stitch. So before I do that though, I want to show you my second version of this design. What I did is I went ahead and I have it here somewhere. I'm looking, here it is. Okay, I wanted to incorporate applique pieces. So I traced the birds and the nest out of a fabric that I liked. I thought that was really pretty. And what I did was cut these out. I'm going to order some of these because they're fabulous. They're Kai, but they're serrated, just barely. You can't even see it. But boy, for cutting really tight, sharp curves and points, these are fabulous. So I will have these on my website, just maybe in a couple weeks. I'm not sure how fast they ship. So then I'm going to cut these out. I'm not going to trace this yet because I need to iron these onto here. And since I use the Pilot friction pen, if I traced it and then iron these on, I would be ironing my lines away. So that would be kind of pointless. So if you do want to try this method, and this is kind of what it's looking like. Let me turn my light box off so you can get a better view. Then you'll want to cut the applique pieces out first, iron them in place, and then you can go back and finish tracing the design. And then you're ready to stitch. So these applique pieces, since it's not going to be something that's washed, I'm not worried about actually stitching through the applique to hold it down. Let me take this away so I can show you. Take that away. Okay, so what I like to do is to actually do a little stem stitch around right up against the applique piece. See if you can see that okay. And when I'm stitching, I'm actually carrying the thread on the side of the applique piece to kind of have it fall over that fabric a little bit to just help to hold those edges in place. So I'll show you that in a minute. Right now, I'm going to show you just some of the different stitches that are on this one. This one's pretty simple. We have the stem stitch, which we've gone over numerous times, but I'll do that again. And right now, I'm going to show you the lazy daisy. That's what these little tiny flower petals are, also on the inside of these round little petals there. So you bring your needle up at the stem, like thus. You're going to wrap your thread around just like the shape of the little leaf. Put your needle in the same hole, bring it up at the tip of the leaf. The thread goes under the needle, pull it through, and then you just tack the needle down right on the other side of that loop. You don't want to pull that loop too tight. I kind of went off course a little bit there, but that's okay. Because you want to leave that nice open loop rather than, if you pull it tight, it's going to close that loop. Let me see if I can do a little better job this time. Up at the top of the leaf, the thread behind the needle, and put the needle down right on the other side of that loop. That one's a little better. That's how you do a lazy daisy stitch. That's what these little flowers are, and these little flowers and all the little leaves. I know I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but I did want to just go over the stem stitch just super quick in case you haven't watched me do it before. You always want to start at one end, not in the middle of a line. So I'm starting at this end. I'm going to start with 1/8 of an inch, come back halfway in between, so 1/16 of an inch. And since there's a slight curve to that leaf, I'm always going to carry my thread on the outside of the curve. And there's one stitch. Now I'm going to take about 1/8, come in the same hole, right back in the same hole. Always carry the thread, be consistent, so it's always on the same side. And you just continue on like that. Now, one thing I did want to point out is how to make a nice pointy leaf if you're turning around and going the other direction. Sorry. It's hard to stitch and talk sometimes. One of the things I like to do, since leaves, I want them to come to a really sharp point. I'm going to go ahead and go past that line, just a couple of threads of fabric. Come back right up on the point, and now turn my fabric and continue on this way. And that gives me a really nice little sharp point. It even, oops. Got a little, there we go. Okay, so it gives it a nice sharp point like that. So I'm going to finish this leaf, and then I'm going to show you the chain stitch. I don't think we've gone over that yet. And yeah, my stitches might look like they're getting a tiny bit bigger. You know, one thing I noticed too, you know, sometimes your thread curls and spins around. I've noticed, like, if I carry the thread on one side, it kind of curls that direction. So if I just spin it in my fingers that same direction, it kind of unspins it, if that makes sense. So every few stitches I'll just kind of spin it a couple times in my fingers, and that kind of helps with that, if that makes sense. You want to spin it the direction that your thread is on. So if my thread's on this side, I'm going to spin it clockwise. If my thread's on that side, I'm going to spin it counterclockwise. Okay, so for the chain stitch, we're going to start at the stem, so at the pointy part. And you know, when you're tracing these, it really isn't necessary to trace every little loop. You could just do a straight line and then do a chain stitch on it, just referring back to the pattern, or you could just do dots at each intersection there. So I went ahead and traced it, but that isn't totally necessary. So we're going to carry our thread just like we would in a lazy daisy, following the shape of that little stitch, go back in the same hole, come up with the thread under the needle, and now we've hooked it in place. And so in a lazy daisy, we'd take the needle and set it down on the other side of that loop. But in a chain stitch, we're going to go inside the loop, right where this thread came up, same spot, and go up to the next little intersection. And you continue that on. So you always want the thread to go under the needle. You don't pull it too tight, or that will gather the fabric and it will close up that little loop, and you want to actually see the loop. And then we'll just do one more, and then to finish it, we will just put the thread on the other side of that loop. There you go. Now when I tie a knot, I like to just wrap it a couple of times, pull it all the way down to the base, put my finger on it and pull. And then I'm going to repeat that. So wrap it a couple of times. Now I'm going to make the knot, the second knot, just like 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch from the first one, cut in between, and now I'm ready to go. So I can just continue stitching. Okay, so one thing that's different about stitching around these applique pieces is, remember when I told you if you're going around a curve, you want to carry your thread on the outside of the curve? For these, I'm doing the opposite, because what happens is you actually, on these, I want the thread to kind of lay in, and that way it'll help cover that edge of the applique and hold that in place. So now I just need to come up with a little starting place. Maybe I'll start right here inside his little wing. So since this is curved this way, normally I would carry my thread on the outside, but I'm going to do the opposite and carry my thread on the inside. And I'm going to do just like I did a stem stitch. That's what this is, 1/4 of an inch, a 1/16 of an inch. Come back up in the same hole. And I'm not catching any of the applique fabric. I'm only catching the background. And this wouldn't work if it was something I was going to wash, probably. But I'm not going to wash it, so that should be fine. And again here, when I come up to this point of his wing, I'm going to do the same thing I did with the leaf to make it nice and pointy. Okay, so I'm going to go just a tiny bit farther, like that. Turn my fabric, and now I'm going to come back this direction. There you go. So on this little guy, the stem is supposed to look like it's going under his wing, and so that's why these pieces of applique are cut apart, and I'm just going to do stem stitch around that. On the pattern, it shows a few little details within the bird, but since this is a patterned fabric, I'm going to leave those off. You can add them if you want, but I'm just going to leave them off. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and finish this up and see how he turns out. Something I did want to point out when doing their feet, these little spaces are too short really to do a stem stitch. So I'm just going to do a single stitch. So come up on one point, go down in the next, and then I'm going to bring my needle back up on this side and go across the bottom of his foot. Now I skip up to the little joint because I can't pull my needle up in this same spot because that's where the needle went down, so it would just undo that stitch. So I'm just going to go past and then back down. So if you have tiny, tiny little places like that to stitch, this is what I do usually. I don't try to, if it's so small, I'm not going to try to do a stem stitch. My mom could. She does beautiful little tiny, tiny, tiny stitches. And it would be easier if it was using a smaller thread, like a single strand of DMC or something. But this is substantial enough thread that would make it hard. Okay, I'm going to have to press his little foot down there. So there's a little bird applique down, and I noticed some of the edges did come up. I must not have gotten them very well the first time with the iron, so I'll go back and press those again. I hope you're having fun doing this. It's kind of exciting. I'm trying to decide if I want to do this for my final quilt and just add a little bit of applique to each one. I don't know. There's too many decisions, but it's kind of fun. All right. Thanks so much for joining me. Bye.